Buy one, save two. The cowboy rescued both Apache sisters and exposed a deadly conspiracy. The desert sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of the small town of Red Rock. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the occasional whiff of smoke from a distant campfire. The town itself was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt uneasy rather than peaceful. Most of the townspeople had gone about their daily routines, sweeping the wooden sidewalks, tending small gardens, or mending tools and clothes. Yet beneath the calm surface, whispers of fear and worry floated through the air like dust particles, nearly invisible but impossible to ignore. Jack Thornton, a cowboy who had spent most of his life roaming the plains and deserts of the West, arrived in Red Rock one late afternoon. His horse, a sturdy chestnut mare named Belle, carried him effortlessly through the town's main street. Jack himself was a man of few words. He had broad shoulders, a weathered face from years under the sun, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Where others saw ordinary buildings or quiet streets, Jack could read the tension, the unease, and the stories hidden in the lines of the townspeople's faces. He was a man who had learned long ago that danger often hid in plain sight. Jack tied Belle to a post outside the local saloon, a wooden building with peeling paint and swinging doors that creaked with every movement. Inside, the saloon smelled of old wood, spilled ale, and the faint scent of tobacco. A few miners and ranchers were scattered at tables, their voices low, their conversations interrupted by nervous glances toward the door. Jack ordered a simple drink and took a seat near the corner, watching and listening. It didn't take long for him to notice the tension. A group of men at a nearby table spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the street whenever the door swung open. They spoke about missing women, their words barely audible over the soft music of a piano in the corner. One miner mentioned two young Apache sisters who had disappeared a few days ago while fetching water from a nearby stream. The sisters were known for their courage and kindness in the town, helping their family and neighbors whenever they could. Their sudden disappearance had left the town in shock, but fear had silenced most people from taking action. Jack listened carefully, his mind piecing together the fragments of information. Something about the way the men spoke, the hesitation, the fear in their voices, told him that the situation was more dangerous than a simple kidnapping. There was a sense of secrecy, as though those involved were hiding something bigger, something that could put the entire town at risk. Jack had seen this before. In his travels across the West, he had encountered many situations where ordinary people had been caught in the middle of dangerous schemes. He knew that acting quickly and wisely was often the difference between life and death. After finishing his drink, Jack stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, fading into the deep blue of the approaching night. Belle nickered softly, sensing his alertness. Jack untied her and began walking toward the outskirts of town, following the dirt path that led toward the desert. His boots crunched against the gravel, each step deliberate, silent, and careful. He moved with a purpose, guided by instinct and experience, knowing that any misstep could alert whoever was responsible for the sisters' disappearance. The desert stretched endlessly before him, a vast expanse of rocks, sand, and sparse vegetation. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying with it the distant howl of coyotes. Jack's eyes scanned the horizon, noting every ridge, every shadow, every movement that might signal danger. He had learned to read the land as others read books, noticing subtle changes in the terrain, tracks left by animals or humans, and signs that revealed hidden paths or abandoned camps. It was this knowledge that gave him confidence, even when he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. As night fell, Jack set up a small camp near a rocky outcrop. He didn't light a fire, knowing that the glow would be visible from miles away. Instead, he used a small lantern with a dim flame, enough to see without drawing attention. He reviewed everything he had learned about the missing sisters, thinking about their family, their fear, and the possibility that they were in immediate danger. The thought of leaving them to face harm alone was unbearable. Jack had always felt a deep sense of responsibility for those who couldn't protect themselves, and the two sisters, lost and vulnerable in the vast desert, were no exception. Hours passed. The stars emerged one by one, bright and cold against the dark sky. Jack stayed awake, listening to the night, his senses alert to every sound. The rustle of the wind, the crack of a branch, the distant movement of animals. Then he noticed something unusual, faint footprints leading toward a narrow canyon. The tracks were small, careful, and uneven, suggesting that they had been made by people moving cautiously, possibly hiding from someone or something. Jack's heart quickened. He followed the trail silently, moving like a shadow over rocks and sand. As he approached the mouth of the canyon, Jack saw signs of human activity, discarded supplies, footprints, and the remnants of a fire that had burned only recently. He crouched behind a large boulder, observing the area. It was clear that someone had been here, and judging by the tracks, it hadn't been long since they left. The sisters could be nearby, but so could danger. Jack's mind raced with possibilities, each more serious than the last. He knew he couldn't rush in blindly. A single mistake could cost lives. Hours turned into early morning as Jack continued his careful exploration. The desert was quiet, almost eerily so, as if holding its breath in anticipation. Then, in the faint light of dawn, he spotted movement. A small figure crouched behind a rock, seemingly trying to hide. His pulse quickened. Approaching slowly, he saw that it was one of the sisters, thin and dusty from days in the desert, but alive. Relief surged through him, tempered by the knowledge that the ordeal was far from over. He called out softly, using a calm and steady voice to reassure her, without attracting unwanted attention. The sister looked up, eyes wide with fear and hope. She recognized him from the town, a figure of trust in a world that had suddenly become dangerous and uncertain. Jack extended his hand, offering both safety and a plan. She nodded, and together they moved cautiously, careful not to alert anyone who might be nearby. Soon they found the second sister, equally frightened but unharmed. Jack could see the bond between them, the unspoken understanding and trust that had kept them going through the worst moments of their ordeal. By mid-morning, the sisters were safely hidden behind a cluster of rocks in a small, sheltered area. Jack took a moment to assess their condition: hungry, thirsty, tired, but resilient. They shared what little they could remember about the kidnappers, men with rough voices, armed and organized, who had been watching the area for weeks. The sisters had escaped when their captors were distracted, but they had no idea where they could go safely. Jack listened carefully, piecing together the fragments of their story. Every detail mattered. Every observation could be the key to their survival and the uncovering of a much larger threat. Jack knew that this was only the beginning. Saving the sisters from immediate danger was one thing. Exposing the deeper conspiracy that had led to their kidnapping would be another. The town of Red Rock held secrets that went beyond simple crimes, and Jack's instincts told him that uncovering them would require courage, strategy, and an unwavering commitment to justice. For now, though, he focused on the sisters, their safety, their fear, and their trust in him. He promised himself silently that he would see them through this ordeal, no matter the cost. As the sun climbed higher, Jack prepared to lead them further into safety. He glanced back at the desert, vast and unyielding, and felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him. Yet with every step he reminded himself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. With that thought, he took the first steps on what would be a long and dangerous journey, one that would test every skill, every instinct, and every ounce of bravery he possessed. The desert wind carried his resolve forward, and the day began with the quiet determination of a cowboy who had faced danger countless times before. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The fate of the Apache sisters, and the truth hidden in the shadows of Red Rock, rested in his hands. And Jack Thornton, with his steady eyes and unwavering heart, was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Jack led the two sisters carefully through the desert, moving slowly but steadily, aware that every sound could reveal their presence. The sun was higher now, warming the rocks and sand, but it was still early enough that the heat wouldn't slow them down too much. The sisters clung to each other's hands, their faces pale from fear and exhaustion, but their eyes held a glimmer of hope. They trusted Jack, and in the wilderness, trust could be more powerful than any weapon. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a sea of gold and brown, dotted with scrub brush, jagged rocks, and occasional cactus. Jack knew that they needed shelter before the sun became unbearable, so he led them toward a narrow canyon he remembered from his earlier travels. The canyon's walls offered shade and protection, a place to rest and plan their next move. As they walked, he kept glancing over his shoulder, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. The footprints in the sand that had guided him the night before were now gone, erased by wind and time, but Jack's instincts told him that danger was not far behind. Once they reached the canyon, Jack settled the sisters behind a large boulder that offered a good vantage point. "Rest here for a while," he said softly. "Drink some water. We'll need our strength if we want to make it out safely." One of the sisters, the older of the two, nodded and accepted the small canteen he offered, taking cautious sips while keeping her eyes on the desert entrance. The younger sister leaned against the rock, shivering slightly despite the morning warmth. Jack handed her a light blanket from his pack, wrapping it around her shoulders. Even in the harsh desert, small gestures of care mattered. The sisters began to speak quietly, sharing what they could remember about their captors. The men who had taken them were organized, heavily armed, and careful not to draw attention. They had been using the desert as a secret base, hidden from the town and anyone who might interfere. From what the sisters described, Jack realized that this was no ordinary kidnapping. The men were part of a larger operation, one that involved illegal activities and likely included people from the town itself. Corruption, greed, and secrecy were at the heart of the danger they faced. Jack listened intently, nodding as he pieced together the details. The sisters' story, though fragmented and frightened, painted a picture of something much larger than a simple crime. Documents had been mentioned, strange maps and letters written in a code the sisters couldn't understand. Whoever was behind this had gone to great lengths to hide their tracks, and they would not hesitate to use violence to protect their secret. Jack's jaw tightened. He had faced criminals before, but this was different. This was bigger, and it required not just courage but careful planning. After resting for a while, Jack led the sisters deeper into the canyon, following a hidden path that twisted and turned like a secret vein through the desert. The path was narrow and rocky, forcing them to move slowly. Jack helped the sisters over steep ledges, supported them when the ground became uneven, and encouraged them when their courage faltered. The sisters were young, but they were brave, and their determination to survive gave Jack hope. He knew that together, they had a chance to escape the danger that had trapped them. As they moved, Jack spotted signs of the kidnappers' recent presence: broken branches, disturbed sand, and faint footprints leading toward a cave he had noticed earlier. He paused, crouching behind a boulder to observe. The cave was small, almost hidden, but Jack could see the remnants of a fire near its entrance. This was likely the hideout the sisters had described. He realized that if they were discovered now, it could mean capture, or worse. Every decision he made had to be precise. Jack whispered a plan to the sisters. "We need to move quietly and stay hidden. If they're nearby, we can't risk being seen." The sisters nodded, understanding the danger despite their fear. Together, they approached the cave cautiously, Jack scanning the entrance while the sisters followed behind him. He noticed crates and barrels stacked near the rocks, supplies that suggested the kidnappers had been here for weeks. Among the items were cooking tools, blankets, and what appeared to be maps and papers hastily stuffed into a wooden box. Jack knew this could be the key to understanding the larger conspiracy. He waited until the path was clear, then moved swiftly into the cave. The sisters followed closely, their footsteps light and careful. Inside, the cave was dark and cool, the air heavy with the smell of smoke and dust. Jack searched through the crates, finding letters, coded documents, and a map that showed hidden routes in the desert and the surrounding area. The map revealed secret mining operations, stolen land, and points of contact for corrupt officials who had been helping the gang operate without interference. Jack's heart raced. This was bigger than he had imagined. The sisters' kidnapping was only a small part of a much more dangerous network. While examining the documents, Jack heard faint voices outside. The kidnappers were returning, likely unaware that their hideout had been discovered. He quickly hid the documents in his pack and gestured to the sisters to stay low. They crouched behind rocks, holding their breath as the voices grew louder. Jack could feel the tension in the air. each second stretching endlessly. He whispered instructions to the sisters, guiding them to remain silent and move only when he gave the signal. The desert had become a trap, but Jack's careful planning gave them a chance to escape. As the kidnappers passed by the cave entrance without noticing them, Jack led the sisters out through a hidden side passage he had spotted earlier. The path was narrow and winding, forcing them to move single file. Jack went first, checking every turn and corner, while the sisters followed closely behind. The adrenaline was sharp, each sound amplified in the quiet of the canyon. Their breaths came in shallow gasps, hearts pounding, but Jack remained calm. He knew that panic could ruin everything, and his steady presence gave the sisters the courage to keep moving. By mid-afternoon, they had left the cave and were moving toward a safer area of the desert. Jack paused to let the sisters rest and offered them water and a small snack he had brought from his pack. He encouraged them to drink and eat, reminding them that strength and energy would be crucial for the journey ahead. The sisters began to relax slightly, their fear still present but tempered by Jack's calm determination. They realized that he was not just their protector, but also their guide and source of hope. Jack spent the evening carefully planning their next move. The documents and map he had found revealed the extent of the conspiracy: illegal mining operations, stolen land, and powerful individuals in the town who were aiding the kidnappers. The sisters had unknowingly been caught in the middle of something much larger, and now Jack knew that exposing the operation would be just as important as saving their lives. He spoke quietly with the sisters, explaining that they would need to be patient and careful, and that their safety depended on every step being calculated and precise. That night, under a sky filled with stars, Jack set up a small camp for the sisters in a sheltered spot among the rocks. He kept the fire low, enough to provide warmth but not enough to attract attention. The sisters huddled close, exhausted, but relieved to be out of immediate danger. Jack kept watch, scanning the desert for any signs of movement. The silence of the desert was heavy, but it was also a protection. They were alone, hidden, and for the first time in days, safe enough to rest. Jack knew that their journey was far from over. The kidnappers could return, and the conspiracy was larger and more dangerous than anything he had faced recently. Yet he also knew that he had the knowledge, the courage, and the determination to guide the sisters to safety. He watched the stars, thinking about the challenges ahead and the importance of staying alert. The sisters slept for a few hours, and Jack remained awake, keeping watch, ready to react to any threat that might emerge from the desert shadows. As dawn broke, Jack gently woke the sisters. "It's time to keep moving," he said. "We have a long journey ahead, but we're not alone anymore." The sisters nodded, gathering their courage and strength for the day ahead. Together, they moved cautiously through the desert, guided by Jack's instincts and knowledge of the terrain. Every step was calculated, every movement intentional, as they made their way toward safety. By the time the sun reached its peak, Jack had led the sisters to a small oasis hidden among rocks and trees. The water was clear and refreshing, and the shade offered a moment of respite from the harsh sun. The sisters drank deeply and splashed water on their faces, feeling a renewed sense of energy and hope. Jack allowed himself a brief smile, realizing that their courage and determination had carried them this far, but he also knew that the real challenge lay ahead: uncovering the full extent of the conspiracy and ensuring that the sisters were protected from those who would harm them. The desert, vast and unforgiving, had tested them already, but with careful planning, courage, and the trust between them, Jack and the sisters had survived the first stage of their ordeal. The journey was far from over, but the bond they had formed, the courage they had shown, and the knowledge Jack had gained from the hideout would guide them through the dangers that awaited. Together they would face the desert, the kidnappers, and the hidden conspiracy, determined to see justice served and safety restored. The sun rose high over the desert, turning the rocks and sand into a sea of golden heat. Jack led the sisters carefully through a narrow valley, keeping them close to the shadows of cliffs and boulders. He knew that the kidnappers could be searching for them, and even a small mistake could reveal their location. The sisters walked quietly, trusting Jack to guide them. Though tired from the previous day, their determination was strong. Each step forward was a step toward freedom, but the dangers they faced were far from over. Jack paused to examine the footprints in the sand. There were signs of movement, but not the kind left by the kidnappers. These tracks suggested that someone else had been in the area. Travelers or perhaps scouts from the gang. He crouched, studying the prints carefully, his eyes scanning the desert for clues. He noticed the patterns, the direction of movement, and the spacing of the footprints. Every detail mattered. In the desert, survival depended on paying attention to even the smallest signs. The sisters whispered among themselves, trying to keep their spirits up despite the tension. The older sister Maria asked Jack quietly, "Do you think they'll come after us?"
Jack looked at her with calm, steady eyes.
"They might," he replied, "but we're going to stay ahead. As long as we move carefully, we can avoid them." He knew that fear could slow them down, but courage could carry them through even the hardest challenges. He encouraged them to rest when they could, drink water often, and keep their eyes and ears open. As they moved deeper into the canyon, Jack noticed something unusual, faint smoke rising in the distance. He stopped and listened carefully, trying to determine the source. Smoke in the desert often meant a campfire, and a campfire could mean people, dangerous people. He motioned for the sisters to stay quiet and crouched behind a large rock to observe. Through the heat haze, he could make out the shapes of figures moving near a small cluster of rocks. The kidnappers, he realized, were close. They had likely returned to check their hideout or search for the sisters. Jack made a quick decision. They couldn't stay in the open, and moving straight past the kidnappers would be too risky. Instead, he led the sisters through a hidden path along the canyon wall, a narrow trail that twisted upward and away from the campfire. The path was steep and rocky, forcing them to move slowly and carefully. Jack went first, testing each step for loose rocks, while the sisters followed, balancing carefully on uneven ground. Their muscles ached, and sweat ran down their faces, but the thought of freedom kept them moving. After climbing for what felt like hours, they reached a small plateau that overlooked the desert below. From this vantage point, Jack could see the kidnappers' camp clearly. They were searching the area, shouting occasionally and waving lanterns. Jack realized that their desperation was growing. The gang didn't expect the sisters to have escaped, and their frustration could make them reckless. This gave Jack an advantage, but it also made the situation more dangerous. One careless move, one moment of hesitation, and the kidnappers could spot them. Jack instructed the sisters to stay low and keep behind the rocks. He examined the map he had recovered from the hideout, studying the routes that would lead them safely out of the canyon. The map showed secret paths through the desert, hidden by cliffs and ravines, that the kidnappers might not know about. Jack made a plan. They would move at night using the darkness as cover and take the safest, though longer route to the nearest town. The sisters nodded, understanding that patience and careful planning were as important as courage. As the day wore on, Jack and the sisters rested in the shade of the plateau. They drank water and shared a small meal of bread and dried meat that Jack had packed. The sisters asked questions about the map, about the kidnappers, and about Jack himself. Though he remained guarded, he answered enough to reassure them and maintain their trust. Maria, the older sister, seemed particularly keen to understand the dangers they faced. Her younger sister Anna listened quietly, her eyes wide but determined. Jack admired their bravery. Even in fear, they showed resilience that would help them survive. When night fell, the desert transformed. The temperature dropped, and the shadows grew long and deep. Jack led the sisters down the hidden path, careful to avoid the open areas where the kidnappers could spot them. The stars shone bright in the clear sky, providing enough light to see without revealing their presence. The sisters moved cautiously, following Jack's lead. Every sound, the rustle of sand, the snap of a branch, the distant howl of a coyote, was magnified in the night. Jack's senses were sharp, and his focus absolute. As they moved, they came across a small stream, a rare source of water in the desert. Jack allowed the sisters to drink and refill their canteen. The sound of the flowing water was soothing, and for a brief moment, the tension eased. Jack reminded them to stay alert, but he also encouraged them to rest their eyes and take a moment to breathe. The desert was unforgiving, but small moments of comfort could strengthen their resolve. Continuing along the trail, Jack noticed fresh footprints in the sand. They were too small to belong to the kidnappers, but their presence indicated someone else had been nearby, perhaps other travelers or scouts. Jack decided to avoid the trail and take a longer, less obvious route. The sisters followed closely, trusting his judgment. The path was difficult, with loose rocks and steep inclines, but it provided safety. Jack knew that the kidnappers were clever, but he was determined to stay one step ahead. Midway through the night, they came across a small cave hidden behind a cluster of boulders. Jack examined it carefully and determined that it was safe enough to spend a few hours of rest. They settled in, huddled together for warmth. Jack kept watch while the sisters slept, listening to the desert around them. The silence was heavy, but Jack's mind was busy. He reviewed the map and the documents, thinking about the next stage of their journey. He realized that reaching safety was only part of the challenge. Exposing the conspiracy that had endangered the sisters was equally important. When the sisters awoke, Jack explained their next steps. They would continue through the desert until they reached a small abandoned ranch that he knew offered both shelter and a vantage point to observe the surrounding area. From there, they could plan the final leg of their journey and decide how to expose the criminals behind the kidnapping. The sisters listened carefully, understanding that each step required caution, courage, and trust in Jack's leadership. As dawn approached, they moved out again, following a hidden path that led to the ranch. The journey was difficult, with rocky terrain and shifting sand, but the sisters' spirits remained high. Jack encouraged them with quiet words of reassurance, praising their courage and determination. He knew that fear could slow them down, but hope and trust could carry them further than anything else. Finally, they reached the abandoned ranch just as the sun began to rise. The old wooden buildings were weathered and empty, providing both shelter and a place to rest. Jack led the sisters inside, carefully checking the perimeter for any signs of danger. They settled in, taking a moment to eat, drink, and rest. The ranch offered a brief respite, but Jack knew that the real challenge was yet to come. They had survived the desert and avoided the kidnappers for now, but exposing the larger conspiracy would require courage, intelligence, and careful planning. Jack examined the documents he had recovered, piecing together the scope of the criminal network. The kidnappers were part of a group involved in illegal mining, land theft, and corruption in the town. Some local officials had been aiding them, turning a blind eye to their crimes in exchange for profit. The sisters' kidnapping was just one part of this larger dangerous scheme. Jack realized that their journey was not only about survival, but also about bringing justice to the town and ensuring that no one else would fall victim to the criminals' plans. As the day progressed, Jack explained the importance of careful observation and patience. They could not act hastily, or the criminals would adapt and strike again. The sisters listened, absorbing every word and understanding the gravity of the situation. Jack also emphasized the importance of trust, teamwork, and courage. He knew that their bond and shared determination would be crucial in overcoming the dangers that lay ahead. By evening, the sisters had regained some strength, and Jack planned the next stage of their journey. They would continue to move carefully, gathering information, observing the kidnappers' patterns, and preparing to expose the conspiracy. The desert had tested their endurance, courage, and resilience, but they had survived. Together they had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, and they were stronger for it. As night fell once more, Jack kept watch outside the ranch, his eyes scanning the desert for any signs of movement. The sisters rested inside, trusting him to protect them. Jack knew that the journey ahead would be filled with challenges, but he also knew that they had the courage, intelligence, and determination to face them. The desert was vast and unforgiving, but with careful planning and unwavering resolve, Jack and the sisters were prepared to confront the dangers that awaited and take the first steps toward justice. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, spilling light across the abandoned ranch where Jack and the sisters had spent the night. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of sand and distant wildflowers. Jack moved quietly, surveying the area from the top of a small hill near the ranch. From this vantage point, he could see the surrounding desert for miles. The jagged cliffs, hidden valleys, and narrow paths that could serve as both escape routes and potential dangers. He knew that the kidnappers might still be searching, and the risk of being discovered was high. Every step had to be deliberate, every movement Careful. Jack woke the sisters gently. It's time to move, he said softly, his voice calm but firm. We have to stay ahead of them if we want to reach safety. Maria, the older sister, nodded and quickly gathered the small belongings they had brought with them. Anna, the younger sister, followed closely, her eyes bright with determination despite the fatigue that weighed on her. Jack handed them their canteens and a small supply of food. Drink and eat before we start, he advised.
We'll need our strength for the next stretch.
The sisters obeyed, understanding that survival depended on careful preparation as much as courage. They left the ranch, moving quietly along a hidden trail that wound through rocky terrain and sparse desert vegetation. Jack led them, pausing often to scan the horizon and check for any signs of pursuit. The desert was vast, but its silence was deceptive. Danger could be hiding behind any rock or hill. Jack instructed the sisters to keep low and move cautiously. Every sound, the crunch of sand underfoot, the whisper of the wind, was magnified in the stillness of the morning. He could feel the weight of responsibility pressing on him, but his focus never wavered. As they navigated the narrow paths, Jack shared what he had learned from the documents and maps they had recovered from the kidnappers' hideout. These men aren't working alone, he explained quietly. They have allies in the town. People in positions of power who are helping them cover their tracks. We have to be careful. If anyone sees us with the documents, we could be in danger again. The sisters listened intently, absorbing every detail. Maria asked questions about the plans and the people involved, while Anna remained quiet but alert, her eyes scanning the landscape as she walked. Jack admired their focus. Even in fear, they were learning quickly, understanding that survival depended on intelligence as much as courage. By late morning, they reached a narrow canyon that led to a hidden valley. Jack knew that this was a safer route, one that the kidnappers were unlikely to know about. The walls of the canyon were steep and jagged, providing cover and protection, but the path was treacherous. Jack helped the sisters navigate loose rocks and steep inclines, guiding them with patience and precision. The younger sister slipped once, but Jack caught her just in time. "Careful," he whispered, steadying her. "One step at a time." The sisters nodded, trusting his experience and following his lead with careful attention. As they descended into the valley, Jack noticed signs that someone had been there recently. Broken branches, disturbed sand, and faint footprints suggested that the kidnappers, or their scouts, had been searching the area. Jack's heart quickened, but he remained calm. "We have to move faster," he whispered to the sisters. "Stay close and follow me exactly." The sisters tightened their grip on each other's hands, following Jack through the valley with silent determination. Every sense was alert, every nerve focused on the path ahead. By afternoon, they reached a small hidden stream, a rare source of fresh water in the desert. Jack allowed the sisters to drink and refill their canteens. The water was cool and refreshing, and the moment gave them a brief respite from the tension and fear that had accompanied them for days. Jack encouraged them to rest for a short while, knowing that their strength and energy were essential for the journey ahead. They huddled together, feeling the comfort of safety, even if only temporary, and a renewed sense of hope began to grow. While the sisters rested, Jack examined the documents they had recovered. The papers revealed a network of corruption and crime that extended far beyond the desert. The kidnappers were part of a larger operation involving illegal mining, stolen land, and local officials who had been complicit in covering up their activities. Jack realized that the sisters' kidnapping was just one small piece of a much larger and more dangerous puzzle. He knew that exposing the conspiracy would require courage, strategy, and careful planning. The stakes were high, and any mistake could endanger not only the sisters but the entire town. By late afternoon, Jack prepared to move again. They had to reach a safe location before nightfall, and the terrain ahead was challenging. The valley narrowed, with cliffs rising on either side, creating a natural corridor, but also a potential trap. Jack led the sisters carefully, scanning the rocks and cliffs for signs of danger. Every shadow, every movement was analyzed. The sisters followed closely, their trust in Jack unwavering. Each step was deliberate, each decision made with precision. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Jack spotted a familiar landmark, a cluster of large boulders that offered both shelter and a vantage point to observe the surrounding area. He guided the sisters toward it, explaining that they could rest there and plan their next move. From this location, Jack could see the desert stretching for miles, with paths that could lead them safely toward the nearest town. He knew that the kidnappers were likely still searching, and he intended to use the cover of night to stay ahead of them. Once settled behind the boulders, Jack and the sisters reviewed their plan. They would move at night, using the darkness as cover, and avoid any open areas where they might be spotted. The sisters listened intently, understanding that patience and careful planning were as important as courage. Jack emphasized the importance of staying alert, conserving energy, and maintaining trust. He knew that their bond and shared determination would be crucial in overcoming the dangers that lay ahead. As night fell, the desert transformed. The temperature dropped, and shadows deepened, creating both opportunities and risks. Jack led the sisters down a hidden path that wound through the rocks and sand. The stars provided enough light to see without revealing their presence. Every sound, the rustle of sand, the snap of a branch, the distant howl of a coyote, was amplified in the stillness of the night. Jack's senses were sharp, and his focus absolute. He moved like a shadow, guiding the sisters with precision and care. During their journey, they encountered signs of the kidnappers' search, fresh footprints, broken branches, and remnants of a fire. Jack adjusted their route, taking a longer but safer path that avoided the areas where the kidnappers might be. The sisters followed closely, trusting his judgment completely. They moved in silence, communicating only with subtle gestures and whispers. Every step was a balance between speed and caution, and the tension in the air was palpable. By the early hours of the morning, they reached a secluded area near a small hill that offered both shelter and a view of the surrounding desert. Jack allowed the sisters to rest and drink water, giving them a brief moment of comfort. He knew that the next stage of their journey would be even more dangerous. The documents they carried held the key to exposing the conspiracy, but they also made them targets. Jack realized that their escape was not just about survival, it was about gathering evidence and bringing the criminals to justice. As dawn approached, Jack reviewed the documents again. The evidence revealed the full extent of the kidnappers' operation: illegal mining, stolen land, and corrupt officials who had been aiding them. The sisters' kidnapping was part of a larger scheme to intimidate the local population and maintain control over valuable resources. Jack knew that exposing the operation would require careful planning, courage, and strategic thinking. He also knew that the sisters' safety depended on his ability to navigate the desert, avoid the kidnappers, and use the evidence wisely. By morning, Jack had formulated a plan. They would continue toward the nearest town, using hidden paths and avoiding any areas where the kidnappers might be searching. Once there, he would find trustworthy authorities and reveal the full extent of the conspiracy. The sisters listened carefully, understanding the risks and the importance of staying calm and focused. Jack emphasized that every step mattered and that trust, courage, and careful planning would be their greatest tools. With the sun rising over the desert, Jack led the sisters out of their temporary shelter, moving cautiously but steadily toward safety. The desert stretched endlessly before them, but they moved with determination and purpose. Every step was a test of endurance, courage, and skill. The sisters, once frightened and vulnerable, now walked with a sense of confidence and trust in Jack's guidance. They had survived the desert, avoided the kidnappers, and gathered evidence that could expose a dangerous conspiracy. As they continued their journey, Jack reminded the sisters of the importance of vigilance. The kidnappers could still be nearby, and the desert was full of hidden dangers. But he also reminded them of their courage and resilience. Together they had faced fear, uncertainty, and danger, and they had survived. The journey ahead would be challenging, but with careful planning, trust, and determination, they had the power to succeed. By midday, they reached the outskirts of a small town, hidden behind hills and rocks. Jack's heart lifted slightly. The next stage of their journey, safety, exposure of the conspiracy, and justice, was within reach. But he knew that the final steps would require careful strategy and courage. The kidnappers were still out there, and the corrupt officials could pose threats, but Jack was ready. With the sisters by his side, he was determined to see their ordeal through to the end, ensuring their safety and exposing the criminals who had caused so much fear and harm. Jack crouched behind a cluster of rocks on the outskirts of the small town, watching the dusty road ahead. The desert behind them was vast, harsh, and unforgiving, but they had survived it. Ahead lay the final challenge, getting the sisters into safety, revealing the conspiracy, and ensuring that justice was served. Maria and Anna huddled close to him, their faces tired but resolute. Jack could see the determination in their eyes, a reflection of the courage they had shown throughout their ordeal. The town was quiet, but that silence could be deceiving. Danger could be hiding anywhere, and Jack knew that the corrupt officials and the kidnappers' allies might still be nearby. He led the sisters along a narrow trail that wound through rocky terrain, keeping them hidden from the main road. Every step was deliberate, every movement calculated. Jack had memorized the town's layout from his previous travels and from the map they had recovered from the kidnappers' hideout. They would enter from a back route, unnoticed by the corrupt officials and guards who might be watching. The sisters followed closely, trusting Jack's guidance completely. Every sound, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant barking of a dog, was amplified in the stillness of the early morning. Jack remained alert, ready to react to any threat. As they neared the town, Jack motioned for the sisters to stay low behind a wall of boulders. "We need to be careful," he whispered. "There may be people watching the roads and entrances. We'll move slowly and quietly. Trust me, we'll make it." The sisters nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. They had survived the desert, evaded armed kidnappers, and learned the value of careful planning and courage. Now they faced the final step, reaching safety and exposing the criminals who had caused so much fear. Jack led them along a narrow alley at the back of the town, using shadows and abandoned buildings for cover. The streets were empty at this hour, the town still waking from a long night. Jack kept the sisters close, guiding them past windows and doors, aware that any careless movement could alert someone. He could see the old courthouse in the distance, a place where justice could be found if they reached it. But first, they had to avoid the kidnappers' scouts and the corrupt officials who had aided them. Every second counted, and Jack knew that the smallest mistake could ruin everything. Suddenly, Jack spotted movement near a warehouse on the main street. Two men were unloading crates, and their posture suggested they were on alert. These were likely members of the gang, watching for signs of the sisters' escape. Jack assessed the situation quickly. There was no way to go around unnoticed. They would have to move directly past the men. He whispered instructions to the sisters, telling them to stay low and move quickly, but silently, as he led the way. The sisters obeyed, their trust in Jack unwavering. With careful timing and steady nerves, they slipped past the men, moving along the shadows of the buildings. The gang members glanced around, but Jack's knowledge of the streets allowed them to remain unseen. The sisters' hearts pounded, but they followed each step precisely, their fear tempered by determination and trust. By the time they reached the far side of the street, the men were gone, distracted by other work. Jack allowed himself a brief moment of relief, but reminded the sisters to remain cautious. Safety was not guaranteed until they reached the courthouse. They continued through the town, avoiding main streets and staying within shadows. Jack led them to a small trusted inn on the outskirts, where a friend of his, an honest lawman, waited. The lawman, Sheriff Reynolds, had been quietly investigating the town's corruption and had been waiting for the right moment to act. Jack explained the situation, showing him the documents and map they had recovered. The sheriff's eyes widened as he read the evidence. It was clear. The kidnappers had been part of a larger conspiracy involving illegal mining, land theft, and powerful local officials who had been aiding them for profit. Sheriff Reynolds immediately organized a small group of trusted deputies. "We'll act tonight," he said firmly. "These criminals won't know what hit them, and thanks to you, Jack, and these brave sisters, we have the proof we need." Jack nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. The desert had tested them all, but their perseverance, courage, and careful planning had brought them to this point. Maria and Anna remained close, anxious but reassured by the sheriff's presence and Jack's calm leadership. They knew that justice was finally within reach. As night fell over the town, Jack, the sisters, and the sheriff's team moved quietly to confront the kidnappers and corrupt officials. The plan was precise. The deputies would surround the known locations of the gang's members, while Jack and the sisters would provide key information about where evidence was hidden. The documents they carried revealed secret hideouts, coded letters, and maps showing the locations of stolen land and illegal mining operations. With this information, the authorities could act decisively, ensuring that the criminals would have no chance to escape. Jack led the sisters to one of the hideouts, a small warehouse on the edge of town. He guided them inside carefully, pointing out where the hidden documents and evidence were stored. The sisters worked quietly, helping him gather the papers and crates. Each piece of evidence was crucial, and they handled everything with care. Outside, the deputies moved into position, surrounding the building and preparing to apprehend the criminals. Jack could feel the tension in the air, but he remained focused. Every detail mattered, and any mistake could allow the gang to flee. Within minutes, the operation was underway. The deputies moved in, arresting the kidnappers and their allies while Jack and the sisters secured the evidence. The corrupt officials who had aided the gang were also taken into custody, their power and influence shattered by the proof Jack had provided. The town's long-standing fear and corruption began to crumble, replaced by a sense of justice and relief. Maria and Anna watched in awe as the criminals were arrested, realizing that their ordeal had not been in vain. They had survived, and their courage had helped bring justice to the town. Once the arrests were complete, Sheriff Reynolds gathered Jack and the sisters. "You've all done something remarkable," he said. "This town owes you a great debt. You didn't just survive, you helped uncover a conspiracy that threatened everyone here. Thanks to you, justice has been served." Jack nodded quietly, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. The desert had tested them, but their courage, intelligence, and determination had carried them through. Maria and Anna smiled, exhausted but happy, knowing that their ordeal was finally over. In the following days, the town began to recover. The stolen land was returned to its rightful owners, and the illegal mining operations were shut down. The townspeople who had lived in fear for so long began to rebuild their lives with hope and confidence. Jack, ever modest, quietly helped where he could, but he did not seek recognition. The sisters' family was reunited, and the bond formed between Jack and the sisters grew stronger. They would always remember the cowboy who risked everything to save them and expose the truth. For Jack, the desert had taught him many lessons. Courage was not the absence of fear. Trust could save lives, and perseverance could overcome even the most dangerous odds. The sisters had learned bravery, resilience, and the power of standing up for what was right. Together, they had faced danger, uncertainty, and betrayal, and emerged stronger for it. The town of Red Rock, once gripped by fear, now had a story of hope and justice that would be remembered for generations. As the sun set over the desert, Jack mounted Belle, his chestnut mare, and looked back at the town. The mountains and hills glowed in the warm evening light, and the air was filled with the faint scent of wildflowers and sagebrush. Maria and Anna waved from the town, their faces filled with gratitude and relief. Jack tipped his hat and smiled faintly. He had done what he came to do. The sisters were safe, the criminals were brought to justice, and the conspiracy that had threatened the town had been exposed. Jack rode off into the desert, the wind in his hair and the sound of Belle's hooves on the sand echoing behind him. The vast open land stretched endlessly before him, full of challenges, adventures, and unknown dangers. But Jack was ready for whatever came next. He had faced the desert, saved lives, and exposed corruption. His courage and determination had made a difference, proving that one person could change the course of many lives. The sisters, safe with their family, often spoke of the cowboy who had risked everything to protect them. The townspeople, once fearful and silent, shared the story of Jack Thornton, the brave man who had faced danger and stood up for justice. The legend grew, inspiring hope and courage in all who heard it. Though Jack had returned to the solitude of the desert, the impact of his actions remained. His story was one of bravery, perseverance, and the belief that doing what is right can overcome even the darkest forces. In the quiet of the desert night, Jack looked up at the stars, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The desert was still vast and harsh, but it had also shown him the power of courage, trust, and determination. The sisters were safe, justice had been served, and a town had been saved from corruption. Jack Thornton the cowboy had done what few could, guided by his instincts, his heart, and his unwavering sense of right and wrong. And as he rode on, the desert wind whispered promises of new adventures, challenges, and opportunities to continue standing for what was just and true.